All right, Mike, we've got about 14 people in the room, and we've got everybody's name, nobody on the phone. If you do need to mute your line, please feel free. We are recording this session so that we can post it online. Good morning. I started a little sooner. I'm Rachel Yoko with IPMI. Mike is going to be, of course, your fearless leader today, so I will turn it over to him to get started.
Yeah, well, thank you again. I know we have folks from Europe and North America on, so again, good morning or good afternoon. It's great to have everyone here. This session is our first session really directed towards the technology providers and consultants that would like to learn more about the APDS specification and how clients are potentially using it in their operations. So I'm going to give everyone another minute because I still see people joining the waiting room, and then we will get started. As I'm going through, because it's not a terribly large group, feel free to throw a question and submit, or if you're bold enough, go ahead and ask a question directly. Just unmute yourself and ask a question, and we'll take the questions as we're going through. This is meant to be kind of a very interactive and a way for all of you to understand a little bit more what the standard is, what's going on with it, and how is it being applied throughout the globe right now.
Joey from the British Parking Association is also going to join us for a little bit this morning, so she'll be on about the first half of the call. I think everybody's in now.
Okay. Well, then we will go ahead and get started. For those just joining, welcome. As we're going through, feel free to either throw questions in the chat and we'll stop to answer them, or stop me and we can explore your question as well. It may trigger additional questions. So with that, let's go ahead and get started about the parking data standards. So our challenge, we all provide solutions or work with operations that have parking facilities and on-street operations and of various needs. And in our world, that data has to be shared with other entities. In the beginning, it was quite simple. It was, I had a website and I was going to share data to my own website. So I didn't have to worry about definitions because I knew what I was sharing. Or I was doing working with some data aggregators or some marketplaces or a couple of the mobile payment tools that were out there. Again, the integrations weren't overwhelming. It was really a one-to-one, or I had just one or two partners to deal with. But over the last 10 years, we've seen an increase in the number of people trying to access that data. Whether it's marketing and ticketing platforms, obviously the internet search engines are exploding in use, and we have the automotive OEMs that are coming in. And this has increased the number of integrations that are required. And the challenge is everyone has a slightly different integration to it. And in the end, everyone is still trying to get to the same people to engage, whether it's to buy parking or to get a mobile, a ride share, or whatever the service might be. And you can see there are multiple paths to get from the top down to where that parking facility is. And each one of those lines is a potential integration. So our challenge, to summarize it, is how to share data in a connected world. And the real significant challenge in that is not so much the sharing of data, it's the fact that every entity uses slightly different terms to communicate that data. And each of those definitions, when they're different, causes confusion or challenges when trying to share data between systems. As a result, lots of entities are expending significant effort and cost to share basic data between their systems and their partners. And that goes for the technology providers. All of you on this call, I know, incur significant expense when a client asks you to partner with a different provider, a technology provider. And a lot of that expense is just working through what are the definitions, how does the information shared. And in addition to within just the parking industry, there are many other industries that are looking for access to data that typically resides in the parking world. That's automotive manufacturers, it's toll providers, it is trucking companies are looking for this data, rideshare companies are looking for the data, Delivery services are looking for the data. So we have a lot of other industries that are trying to access the same information that we have available today. And I've already kind of talked about it. It's more than just about sharing parking data. It's supporting mobility services. It's supporting delivery services. We're going to talk about some of the stuff that's happening with automated robots for delivery on sidewalks, where there's some activity happening there. And then it's recognizing the development and growth of curb management needs and the use of the sidewalks. All of that is data that people need access to in a common way. So that leads into the data specification, and what exactly is it? So in 2017, IPMI started an effort to create a data specification. It was quickly joined by the EPA, the European Parking Association, and the British Parking Association to develop a global data specification. And that they formed the Alliance for Parking Data Standards. When the Alliance for Parking Data Standards was created, there were several guiding principles that were established. And these are very important because they define the limits about what's trying to be done. First of all, it's a not-for-profit collaboration with input from industry experts. APDS is not trying to benefit or generate income from the collection or selling of data. That's a very important point. This is meant to be an area where industry participants can come together to work out how to define definitions, how to define effective communication and messaging formats for the benefit of the industry, as well as to help us interact with other industries. Our main focus is to develop common data definitions and associations for parking and mobility activities. There is someone that just came off of mute. Rachel, if you could find that person that's providing feedback.
Yes, I'll look.
So the key part is those common data definitions and working to define those. Through the data definitions, the specification will enable easier sharing of relevant parking and mobility data. We'll spend less time trying to negotiate what terms mean and have more time working on creating value with the data that we can share. And as I've mentioned already a couple times, it's not just within the parking industry. We're talking about collaborating with external stakeholders, whether it's ITS, intelligent transportation system providers, OEMs for manufacturers and other equipment, or mobility as a service providers. And we'll talk about some of the interactions that we're having currently with those other industries and how they are adopting the data specification in their work already. And that goes into the next point, integrating parking more effectively with other standards. We can talk about some of the work that has been done with the European DATEX platform, as well as other European Union groups that are developing regulations around the sharing of data. And just to reiterate, kind of a follow-up to the first point, there is no revenue or data control aggregation by APDS. APDS is not in the business of delivering solutions to entities. We are not in our scope is not to define how to use data. That is really the purview of each of you that have your own systems to define and describe your value proposition to customers. The goal of APDS is to enable a common language so that entities can share data effectively from system to system and from within the parking industry to outside of the parking industry. I'm going to stop here just to make sure, see if there are any questions on the guiding principles or the intent of APDS. Any questions? Okay. So again, summarizing, the objective of APDS, it's to enable entities to spend more resources on innovating with their data versus taking the time to clarify how to integrate data. Through our experience, we know a lot of times today, 30 to 40% of the time is just between two entities trying to figure out what data they have and how to get the data passed from one group to another. We want to help ensure that that time is spent on innovative ideas. So this goes into our current sponsors, and this is just more of a tip of the hat of the people that are already participating and enabling and contributing resources to help fund the development and the engagement with other industries and with ISO, which we'll talk about here shortly. But in addition to these entities, we have over 600 other entities and individuals across 6 continents that have engaged and are participating in the development of these specifications. And through that work, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here shortly with ISO, we've also have engaged with over 25 national standard bodies globally who are in the process currently, and we should within the next 2 to 3 months, have ISO recognizing the APDS standard as the global standard for parking data. So a lot of effort has been done, and it's through these 600 people or more people that have been engaged, helping us move it forward and engage it. And I know some of the folks on this call have been involved as well for some time. So thank you for all of your assistance. So let's talk a little bit more about what the specification is in detail. The intent, again, is to define common definitions for industry data and for concepts. Through a common data definition, we were able to more quickly and easily identify where gaps are or where differences are. We're going to provide acceptable formats for sharing relevant data. You'll notice we aren't describing a required API. We want to ensure that every entity has the ability to navigate what they need to accomplish between 2 providers. We're not going to suggest that APDS has every view of every specific need between 2 systems. But what we will do is for very common data sharing, we are going to provide proposed or recommended messaging formats to help speed up that sharing of data and to provide some benchmarks of what people can use to leverage to build from. APDS is concerned with the definition of the data. We are not concerned with how you use the data in a system or how you define the best operating practices for a parking operation. We are not describing how to run a parking operation, and we are not telling providers how to use data in their system. And that's a very important point. This is not to try to consolidate everyone into a common approach to building software. Finally, APDS recognizes not everyone or every system needs all of the data. You're going to see there is an incredible amount of detail available within the data specification. The data specification, though, was written in a way that allows an entity to go and provide the level of detail that's appropriate for their operation. You can use as much or as little of the data specification as fits your needs. So this is a very high-level view of the current data specifications and the 7 different data domains that are currently covered under it. I'll quickly go through them, and then we're going to spend some time talking about some of the use cases. So the first data domain, and probably one of the more significant ones, is place. Place describes the physical structure and operating attributes of the operation. So it includes hierarchy data. You can describe it, a parking facility, as being part of a campus, and then you can have the campus can have multiple parking facilities or surface lots or areas, because a key part of the data spec is that it's not just for parking, it supports mobility services, delivery services, or other zones, whether it's a parking zone, delivery zone, rideshare loading zone, or some other use. A restaurant or a cafe may be another use. So you have the ability to go down to lowering levels of detail. In a garage, you can define a level. Within a level, you can define a certain area of the level that's associated to reserved parking or a rideshare pickup zone or EV charging. And you can go all the way down to space. You have the ability to describe the structure. Is it above ground, below ground, surface lot? What other capabilities are there? You can go into operating characteristics, time of operations, types of operations, pay by plate, pay by space, etc. Operating hours, contact data. Who are the various people supporting the facility or the operation, and how do you get a hold of them? Who is the owner of the facility? Who is the operator of the facility? Where is customer support? Is there remote customer support? There's a whole bunch of different data elements that can be provided in there. We go into payment data. and as well as space data as well. The one thing that we haven't added on here that's has been a very recent addition through our work through ISO, and it really falls under the layout structure data. We now have the ability to support equipment and services available in a facility, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. A key differentiator of this data spec from many of the other data specs is the concept of a right. And a right is a permission to do something. It could be a permission to park, a permission to do a delivery, a permission to load or unload, a permission to have a cafe, a permission to run a robot on the sidewalk. This is very different from a lot of the other specs because most other data specs merge rights and rates into one concept. In the APDS, those are separate, and you'll see why they're separate as we go through some of the examples. So we have the ability to define rights. Rights have eligibility. Who's allowed to use that right? I may be a public person trying to park in a garage, and I would have a right as a public person to park. I may be in a residential building then, and only as a resident do I obtain the right to park. We describe the credential data, who is the owner of the right, and also transaction data is attached at the right. Rates then define what are the fees associated to acquire that right for a specific place. And rates again have a rate fee structure, which can be flat rate, tiered rate, incremental rates. There's many different ways to manage the rates. You can add in taxes, you can add in surcharges. So if you have an entity that is selling parking on your behalf and they have a convenience fee, you have a way to document that and share that and understand what the fee structures being passed around are. Obviously, rates, rights, and place all combine together to issue an actual parking transaction to someone. Quote data also enables us an important domain that allows an entity to better control in a digital world who is accessing and asking questions about rates. And we'll have an example a little later on that we'll go into a little bit more. Occupancy utilization data. This goes into the raw data of how many spaces are available or how much area is available to perform a service, whether it's delivery of mobility services. And then we also have data that describes how is it actually being used today, which is demand. Supply compared to demand obviously creates utilization numbers. The key point here is the APDS doesn't define how to do predictions. We allow you though to share what your prediction is. So let's say you're an entity that I have 20 parking spaces available, which would be my supply. Right now I have 5 vehicles in the facility. 5 divided by 20 would be 25% utilization. But maybe I also know I have some reservations that are coming in. An entity would be able to share that data through the APDS standard and allow another entity to make a prediction of, but I predict that utilization is going to go to 40% by 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, whatever it might be. The key point here is APDS is never telling anyone how to do the prediction. That is up to each entity to define their own algorithm. But APDS will allow an entity to share their prediction and describe their definition of that prediction. Because that forecast may be at 11 p.m., I am predicting the utilization to be 80%, or I'm predicting the utilization to be the color red and describing what the color red is. The final 2 data domains are session. That is the actual use of a right. So when someone enters a facility, a session starts, and when someone leaves a facility, a session ends. And it allows us to track all the data elements and activity that happens. So as an example, assume a car enters a facility and it's a pay by space operation. You may have an LPR camera at the entrance. So when they enter the lot, you start the session. But we know it's going to take the individual 5 to 10 minutes to actually park the car to start their transaction via mobile phone or at a payment kiosk. Well, at the session will show when they entered the facility. We can have another element within the session that says their payment started at this time frame. We know when the payment stopped, and we know when they left the facility. So within the session data, you have the ability to communicate specific events that are occurring. And that leads into the observation data. And observation data is exactly what it talks about. It's observations that are being made that may be used for enforcement, it may be used for session data, and it just may be used for regular data collection. An example of an observation is an LPR read. As a vehicle drives down the road, it's reading all the license plates. Each one of those is an observation. Some of the observations may be related to a session or to a write. Other observations just may be data collected. Another example of an observation is when someone pulls into a parking garage and they pull a parking ticket. That is also an observation. We have observed someone entering the facility, and that data can be used. So observation allows us to collect data that may have different uses for different groups. So that's a very high level of the data specification. I'm going to stop, see if there are any questions before we kind of jump into some use cases. Okay. Talkative group. It's either early morning or right after lunch, and people are still digesting.
Sorry, I got one call for you, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
Or one question, excuse me. So whereabouts do we? I'm looking through the documentation, the 2.1 documentation as well, and I saw there's some stuff in here from Park Assist. Is there any whereabouts is like revenue control, like for call center, command center, that type of stuff? I'm assuming that falls under the place with the combination of rights data. Yeah. But is there a section that's been defined under whereabouts that stuff is located?
So it depends on what you're specifically looking for. If you're trying to identify what are the hours of operation, how do I connect to the stuff, that is going to be in place. The equipment and services that we were talking about, that's in 3.0, which is going to be released in April.
Okay, got it. Okay, so that's like opening gates, vending, adjusting rates, validating tickets, monthly parkers, things like that.
Yes, it doesn't necessarily go into all the detail of how to control a gate, but you have the ability to say, I want to trigger a session started. Some of that is those are very good questions. Some of that is going to be dependent on you working with the technology provider on how do I trigger a gate. But the general information about a parking session is started, this person has a monthly parking pass, this person has paid for their monthly parking pass, that will be standard through this.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you, sir.
So going through some examples, some of these we already talked about. So the standard supports the sharing of location information. And again, this may be a garage, a surface lot, or a zone, such as a delivery zone, etc. Through our location data or place data, you identify the area and you identify the usage that's allowed. A key part of it, obviously, is associating address, geolocation, and contact information. And all of our data, all of the data standard really references back to place. It's a very important component of the data. But as I talked about before, you have the ability to get into finer and finer levels of data. So all of that, those same elements, you may have a multi-story garage as shown in that bottom left there. Maybe the top two levels in a hypothetical situation only allow the top two levels to be used from noon till 4 o'clock, and they're off limits before then. So you can define different operating restrictions, operating hours, and other capabilities for each group. And similarly, on the right-hand side with the darker colored image, every portion, maybe every column or row of parking has a different need. Maybe the one on the right is for mobility rideshare pickup, and the one on the left is for delivery trucks, and the one in the middle is for parking. Or there's EV charging focused areas or residential parking committed areas. The data standard allows you to start to segment and communicate various roles there. Another key part of placement is the ability to describe how to enter and exit the facility. So you have a vehicular access type of place, and that describes the entry or exit zones. And that may be for the use of how wide or how much weight can this entry take? When is the entry lane open or closed? And Rick, that may kind of go back to some of your questions about controlling the equipment. Is it a reversible lane? Which way is it operating or not operating today? But it also has other uses. We've been working a lot with the trucking industry and as they work on truck stops and supporting truck stops, there was a need to be able to describe on the interstate or on the highway how to get to the truck stop. So what exit ramps to take, or what intersections to look for to route yourself towards the truck stop. That is all able to be defined in the parking standard. So you can think of that also being useful for an event type operation where you need to figure out how to route people to just different areas of a facility. You can do that through the standard as well. I see a question just came in. Would this only work if the parking map had these metrics available? How is this made available to the consumer? Great question. So the standard would allow, if your parking management software has the data, that's fine. Or if you are using a third party, maybe you have a parks equipment that's doing some of this stuff, and then you're working with a mobile provider that has the other information. By using a common data standard, you can now more easily merge the data and then distribute it out to other entities that would then share or collect and present that data. So imagine taking the data from your two technology providers, if you're an operator, merging that data and then giving it to a ticket master as an example, or a Paciolan who are using the data to sell event tickets with parking as well, and they want to provide the directions. All of that data could be merged because it's in a common format, consolidated and sent off to the Paciolan or ticket master. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, please feel free to come off mute and ask the question. Okay. So those are some of the examples of the use of place. We also talked about the placement of equipment and services. And Rick, I thank you for calling that out. 2.1 is the current version. 3.0 is going to be released for public comment in just a couple weeks. And in there, we have the placement of equipment and services. And the benefit of this is to identify within a place where certain equipment is, whether it's parking equipment and being able to go into more detail about that parking equipment, if it's ATM, if it's bike racks, or electric vehicle chargers, which obviously are becoming a more important capability in our world. And it allows you to go into more detail about the EV or about the equipment. As an example, for an EV charger, it may be able to talk about what type of voltage is available, what type of auto connector or charging connector is available. Are there ATM machines there, and where they're located in the facility. Similarly, we have the ability to layer in services as well. And this was really generated by the discussions with the trucking industry. They wanted the ability for truck stops to also be able to show what services are available. Are there maintenance services? Are there shower or restroom services? Are there concessions available, and what types of concessions? So the standard has the ability to consolidate that information and associate it to a place, and where appropriate, include rights to that. So maybe if you park, you gain a right to use the concessions or the restrooms, etc. The next use case is around rights. And again, this is a very critical part of the APDS, and one of the key differences from a lot of the other specifications that are out there. We've separated the idea of giving a permission to do something from the price of doing something. And activities are very open in the spec. It is basically whatever you can think of, you can define it. You have a way of articulating it and communicating out. So they can be the more common parking related ones, but we're also seeing a lot of people using it for delivery and service related areas. So I have a 200-meter zone on a curb that in the morning is available for parking. From 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock, though, that same area, the permissions convert to allowing delivery or mobility pickup zones. And then in the afternoon, it turns into a traffic lane. So the only permissible activity is to drive on it. So we have the ability to define those rights for those areas or places. And then that goes into the rates, and then communicating rates between systems and platforms. This is I think the most useful use case is if you have a parking equipment or payment kiosk, and you're trying to also communicate to one or multiple mobile payment providers. The entity that's trying to manage all this wants to be able to communicate those rates in a controlled way and in a consistent way. And this allows the entities now to share the rate and make sure that it's done consistently. I'm sure all of us as technology providers have struggled with trying to understand the intent of a customer with what they're trying to do with more complicated rate structures. This will help to ensure that those are communicated in an equitable way. And then also making sure that every entity that's in charge of selling the parking is using the same rates in a consistent way. The second use then is generating and issuing quotes. So this is now an entity has the rates and the rights and the place and control. And in a long time ago, when we just had simple parking management equipment, it was easy. I set up the rates, and as people came to the facility, the little circles represent our happy customers. They would get the rate. It was very simple. But then the digital world came upon us, and we had these partners that were providing digital capability. So Spot Heroes, Easy Parks, Park Mobiles, Pay by Phones, and many more entities. Historically, that was all through verbal sharing. Someone had to make a phone call, update the rate, and then those quotes would come from each partner. Through the data standard, and it becomes more critical for an owner or operator of a facility to understand what quotes are being issued so that they can control pricing, make sure the right rules are being applied, and to support dynamic pricing. Now the entity can issue quotes to those mobile pay. So the mobile pay is receiving requests from the customer. They are then calling back down to the central system saying, I have a request for someone to park from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock at this rate. Here is all their credential information. The central place can then now confirm it and say, yes, I will offer a quote up to that person through that third party to make the purchase. This provides the owner or operator with much more visibility of what's happening and allows them to better support dynamic pricing and understanding who's buying what from their various partners. And this becomes more critical as the digital world it continues to expand quite quickly. So imagine having the Pacquiolans, imagine having airlines and hotels trying to access your parking facility while you're selling on an Arrive or a Spot Hero site or a Park Mobile or a Pay by Phone site. All of this information is flying around, and what we're trying, the standard is going to allow you to do, instead of giving certain amounts of parking availability to each entity and allocating it out, you now have the ability, or our customers will have the ability to control it centrally while still leveraging all of the great services that these third-party providers have. So that's the benefit of the quote and being able to share that data and continue the growth in the digital world. Any questions on that? Okay. Sharing occupancy and availability. Again, the data standard breaks out occupancy into the supply side of data. So how many spaces are available today, or how much area is available for a permission. The benefit of doing the supply side separately is it allows us to make temporary changes as necessary. So I may have an area that has 100 spaces available, but I know from March 25th through March 27th, I have a construction project going on and I need to take out 20 spaces from circulation. The standard allows you to layer in temporary reductions to the supply. Similarly, on the supply side, on the demand side, you have the ability to describe what that demand is. One of the key things that are built into the standard is understanding that a lot of entities are doing predictive approaches to utilization. To do an accurate prediction, you have to have a clear understanding of how accurate or precise the data is. So the example would be if I'm doing a manual calculation, or I'm having someone walk around the garage once a day to calculate my demand, I know my as soon as I take that calculation, it's going to start to age. Versus if I have a space sensor, which every second is telling me the space is available. So through the demand side of the data, we have the ability to also not just say, here's the value of the demand, but here is how the demand was calculated. So someone has an idea of the precision and the age of that data, which becomes very useful in a predictive world. So how is this getting used? Here's an example of a site in the UK that has built a data platform based on the APDS standard. And what this site is doing is they're taking data on the left-hand side from public facilities and private facilities, and they have them communicate their data through the APDS interface standard to a common data platform. That common data platform is not an APDS related business or anything. It is the local authorities, but they're collecting up all that information. They then have the third-party mobility providers and users of the data who then access that platform through an APDS standard interface as well. So this is a great example of how cities are starting to build up their data to understand what is happening across their communities and then share that data in a consistent way. And again, you'll see the vertical lines. The APDS interface standard only happens with the data communication. It's not involved in the actual data hub and what's happening. And where is this entity going? So this is what they've built to date, but where they're going is a place where they can control, can watch and monitor all of the activity, whether it's off street, on street, and curbside activity as well. They're tracking what's happening with delivery services. They want to do their enforcement tools through this data so that they have a good idea of activity in the city for planning purposes and to make sure rates and other things are consistently being applied by their various providers. So this is one of the things that the UK government, who is a supporter of the APDS standard, is promoting. This was a sample of a city that they launched about a year ago, and they are now in the process of taking this to other cities. And we also have New Zealand and Australia, which are also exploring leveraging the APDS standard to build for their municipalities similar sort of data structures. So this is an example use case, which is pretty exciting to see. And I think getting to the place that many of us in the industry have talked about for many years of how to collect the data up and to distribute it for these various entities, whether you're a municipality, a university, a corporate campus, or even a private operator trying to manage all of their own operations. And that leads us into the final use case, which is the curbside management. This is a growing area, and COVID has really accelerated the demand for these sorts of use cases. And it's the idea of a space that was typically used just for parking actually has many more uses, whether it's for delivery services, rideshare pickup services, or even a cafe on the sidewalk. The curbside allows the rates, the rights, and place information to be combined in a way to more uniformly communicate what's allowed to be done in this area for a fee and how to then to enforce it so that our existing systems can support it. So that kind of goes through the existing use cases. I'm going to go back up. Any thoughts or questions?
This is Rick again. I've just got a question really on the overall concept of the APDS. Yeah, I mean, and Mike, you know this as well as I do, that my life's work at this point in the parking industry has been to get a revenue control, products to integrate with us. And it's such a nightmare that is there any requirements of, as these companies join the APDS, to where they're required to build out this API or these standards, and do they have a certain amount of time to get it into production and actually use it? Or, is there any requirements around that?
Great question. You're about 6 slides early.
Okay, fair enough. I'll wait then. No worries. Thanks, man.
Thanks. So let's talk a little bit about the actual specification. I don't know on here who is a real data savant. This is actually what the actual specification looks like. It is model driven. It's got a full UML data models with all terms defined. It's JSON API supportable messaging. And we've already integrated with many existing ISO standards and other national standards. But we're not going to go through that right now. I know some of you may love to talk about it, but what I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about was how are our owners, operators using the specs, and I think how this group can enable supporting it.
One question on the data models: are those available to download anywhere?
They are. The 2.1 is available now, but I would suggest you wait till April to get the 3.0. And the documentation includes the UML models, the data dictionaries, as well as some use case documents and messaging formats. Suggested messaging formats is going to be published as well that provide guidance on some initial API structures.
Thank you, sir.
So steps to adopt the specification. So it's a migration. It is not an immediate cutover. As we work with clients and if consultants, as you're engaging with your entities, we want to work with the customers and their IT teams to develop a plan. It has to be about collaboration. No one system is going to be able to cut over unless they were building it from scratch day one. And it's not reasonable to assume all of the great systems and technologies that already exist are going to be able to cut over that quickly. So this is really about a plan of how do you plan to support the sharing of data via the spec. We are not asking anyone to rewrite their systems, and definitely no system has to be fixed. It is very possible that an existing system has a current database structure that is not going to fit exactly with what the APDS standard looks like. Terminology is going to be different. Data associations are going to be different. The key to use the APDS data specification is to talk, how do I translate from my current data structure and how do I communicate data in a compliant way with the specification? And that really goes into defining the data. So that goes into the first step. Compare the APDS definitions to your existing data definitions. Once you understand where the differences exist, either as a consultant working with the end user or a technology provider, that's going to start to give us a basis of understanding what work needs to be done and how might you handle the translating of data from our data systems through the proposed messaging formats. I think the other challenge for a lot of technology providers is going to be is our clients have implemented the systems in varying ways. So while the system was defined with a certain data definition in it, the application of the system has been modified when it was actually implemented for each customer. So you're probably going to have to work with each customer to also understand what is their definition to make sure that we can be compliant. Once you identify those data definition differences, you'll be able to understand which can be converted to the APDS data definition and which ones may need to be translated. As an example, maybe in your system, you use the term facility ID. Well, to fit into the APDS data definition, facility ID would be communicated as a place ID. So that's a very simple translation. Your data definition may be the exact same, just the terminology is different. But there may be other differences where rate has to be broken into write and rate. And we'll have to figure out how to translate those components out to be compliant with the data definitions. Again, I think this is going to require us to sit down with your customers and to define those data definitions with them to make sure everyone has a similar understanding and agreement on the data definitions. And while that work may be some heavy lifting up front, it's going to allow you to more quickly integrate into the rest of the world very quickly. And when I get to the ISO stuff, we'll talk about all of the areas where ISO is already integrated in with the APDS standard. Step 2 is going to be setting the expectation. Our customers are going to ask for plans to migrate to APDS. We are also, while we're having this session, we're also working with universities, municipalities, and parking operators to help them understand how to adopt the APDS in a fair and reliable way. We're reminding them the request is not to rewrite systems. We're not asking anyone to change out their data architecture. We're not asking them to change out databases. Their request should be on how to communicate data using the APDS data specification. And also do not expect an overnight change and do not expect providers to rewrite their solutions. our customers have to work with us being the technology providers, to understand their priorities and to work through a plan on how they intend to use it. And it's critical to remind everyone, the specification is about sharing data. And it's important that solutions can translate and share the data using common data definitions. The intent of the data specification is not to tell an entity how they should use data or how they should derive value from their data. That is up to each technology provider and to each operation to decide how they use the data, how they operate the facility. The APDS standard is only focused on communicating data in a common format and in a common definition. So what might we see as we understand the expectation? We've already seen this in several RFPs. These are examples of terminology that have been placed in certain RFPs today, where entities are going to say they want to see progress towards the APDS standard. And I think that goes to, actually, maybe one more slide and then we'll get to it. So that goes to step 3 about being realistic. The specification is about sharing data. It's not rewriting systems. It's not how you operate. Do not require providers to rewrite their system. Feel free to continue to talk to customers when they ask you to be APDS compliant. Help set that expectation. The expectation is around, though, using common data definitions and being able to share data using the specification. Doesn't mean the data needs to be stored in the system that way, but it should be able to be translated and communicated. And it's critical that parties collaborate and set their priorities on that migration to the data specification. It is not going to happen overnight, but over time, it will. So what does that mean for us, and how do we leverage the benefits? Well, the data specification allows us to engage with other standards to ensure a single data specification can be leveraged. So big words for, we are already engaged with the automotive manufacturers on automated valet parking systems. So the automotive manufacturers are building systems that are going to allow a car to park automatically in a garage. They are already adopting the APDS data definitions into their data standard. So we've been working with the Hondas and the Toyotas and the General Motors on their technology ISO spec. And their spec is relying, where necessary, on this standard. There are other groups that are working on truck parking, specifically in Europe. The truck parking groups are leveraging the APDS and actually modifying some of the stuff that they've already built to leverage APDS, to use the same terminology and the same data concepts into their work. There's a group that's working on automated delivery systems for sidewalks, basically delivery robots that are going to traverse our sidewalks in our streets to make deliveries for pizzas and Amazon and other things. They are leveraging the APDS data standards into their standard as well. So by leveraging and building on this data specification in our efforts and allowing us to be able to communicate through the APDS standard, we're automatically going to be enabled to work with a lot of these other data providers, or significantly reduce the amount of effort it's going to take us to integrate to them. And then finally, because APDS is an independent data specification, we're trying to ensure equal ability to support owners and operator needs. By having a common platform, we hope that it provides the ability for all people with innovative ideas to engage and to promote their solutions, and allow other people to access that data more quickly. So what does that mean for this group? As we know, this is the first user group meeting for consultants and technology providers, and we have another one set up in June. And the goal is to engage this group, because the APDS is an industry-led effort, to understand what the needs are and where do we need to focus APDS to help the needs of this group, as well as the owner operators, as well as those third-party entities that need access to parking and mobility related data. So one of the things that we're actually engaged in talking about, and we would love to collect your feedback, and it doesn't need to be today, but we can start the conversation today. But over the coming months, we want to understand, we know customers desire an easy way to identify technology platforms that are at some stage of adoption of the APDS specification. We have heard that clearly from all of them. They want to know who is doing it. There have been many groups that have said you should require everyone to certify that their system is APDS compliant. We understand that there are lots of costs and issues with doing that. So we want to explore what are the right ways that we think that entities can show progress towards adoption of the APDS specification without incurring extra costs to certify, if you will, or to demonstrate through third-party officials that they are actually 100% compliant. The other challenge is we know that every entity is going to adopt the specification at a different need, and forcing everyone to be 100% compliant may not be the most efficient way for an entity to support APDS. They may only need 20% of the specification developed for what their client needs are. So we also want to recognize that there are differences. So one of the things that we'll be talking about over the next couple months is what are the ways to show that? How would this group like to guide that discussion? Again, allowing you to take credit and show customers where you are in your migration and adoption, which is a way to separate yourself from other entities without incurring extra cost or burden to adopt the standard. So I'm going to stop there and open it up. What are thoughts? Really? So everyone's good for certification?
Mike, everyone's good with whatever you
guess.
require of them. Then this is, I want to emphasize to Mike's point. This is, an open session. It's a feedback session. We are looking to hear from you on what is going to be most innovative, effective. You know what I mean? And so I know you may not necessarily want to speak up, but you're welcome to submit feedback or comments to me, Mike, any of the APDS team, because we are laying out a plan now. You know what I mean? So from ISO to the next sort of, we're eating the elephant, right? The standard one piece at a time, to the next sort of priorities. These are your feedback sessions. We've scheduled more for June, but would love to hear sort of where you are now.
Yeah, this is Rick again. Sorry to chime in here, but one of the biggest problems that I've ran into with not with the APDS from a concept, but just from is motivating some of the players in this that we're trying to get to comply to the standard to have any motivation at all whatsoever to do this. And I mean, like I said, I've been trying to get something similar to this with every single revenue control vendor for 10 years probably from our command center system, and it is a nightmare because they have zero motivation to do any of it at all. And then if they even do have motivation to do it, they will only give you the small tiny piece of the 5 or 6 things that you want to do, and then they also want to go out and charge $100 a month per location for that, which obviously doesn't really work financially either for my customer, which is the larger operators or smaller operators. And then it's just they don't want to play on the level playing field, I guess. And I'm just curious if you guys have worked out any motivational techniques, so to speak, to get them to start to comply with that stuff, or at least to play nice.
Yeah, we aren't doing electric shock therapy yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. And there will be no dark rooms with blindfolds. But what we are doing is by defining a standard and enabling everyone to participate in the discussion. And I will say, we have had great participation from many of the different technology providers, many of the entities that you're probably even referring to. People are engaged. They're trying to learn. They're trying to understand. I think some people are afraid that that losing the data and would lose their value of their business, and which is why we are
revenue stream.
Yeah, and we've been very clear. APDS is not trying to get into that space at all. This is just about data sharing. It is up to each individual to manage their data and their pricing models. That is on their own. So we won't be able to solve the issue of why does it cost so much, but we're hoping that the market, because there is now a common way to share data, entities are going to say, okay, I'm going to be competitive now because At one time, it was expensive to share data. It took a lot of time and a lot of energy, as you know, Rick, to try to navigate every different system and how to make it work the way you wanted it to work, and et cetera. But through the data standard, we expect that the actual cost to do things will decrease. And so hopefully market pressures will enable people to more actively participate. In regards to the persuasion, like I've been very happy with the engagement of most technology companies in how they are participating and engaging in the dialogue, if for no other reason, just to understand what's happening. Through that, though, we are seeing many of the end users and acquirers of technology who are putting in terms like I shared with you in that RFP document. That's a key part that we're seeing more and more often. Our RFPs are saying this is a requirement of the RFP. And we're trying to educate, when we are educating those owner operators, so they know what to look for. And I think this is where we want to have a very good discussion about, is it support, is this a compliance, or is it certification? How do technology providers show? We have run into instances where entities are already saying they are APDS compliant when they haven't even participated or downloaded the spec. So we know that that's gaining some market value where people need to be a part of it, which is good. But this is really the point we want to have with this group, is to understand what is the appropriate level. We definitely want to push people to be rewarded for their work and to be able to communicate what they're doing in the space so that the end customers understand what they're buying. We think that's critical so people know. But at the same time, we don't want to burden an organization. I'm going to go back to, for those that have been in the industry a long time, when PCI came out, it was incredibly burdensome cost for everyone to trying to figure out what to do, because it was, you had to be certified by a certain date or your system couldn't be bought. It was very tough. And we saw a lot of shenanigans, I'll call it, where people might say they were certified and they really weren't, and all sorts of crazy stuff. So we want to try to balance that. It's not cost prohibitive for people to do it, nor do we want to create extra costs. The whole goal of the data specification is to make it easier to share data and to make it more cost effective for all of us. We want everyone in the spectrum to spend more time innovating and creating better solutions and delivering better services than spending time on navigating how to collaborate with other entities and how to share data and spending time correcting mistakes in the data. So this will be over the next 3 months as we continue to explore what is the right way to go about this. We really need everyone's engagement on what works for your entity. How do you get rewarded for participating and going down the path and being able to demonstrate to your customers, here's where you are, because we know it's going to be valuable, but without burdening your business with extra costs that aren't appropriate.
Hey, Mike, this is Peter Felice from Walker. Can you hear me okay?
Hey, Peter.
Great. Nice to see you again. It's been a while. So I know that this call is focused on consultants and technology providers, and you may be doing, probably are doing, other calls reaching out to potential clients, actually,
Yep.
End client. And I just wanted to make a suggestion, if you haven't considered this already. What I'm seeing from my perspective inside Walker is that there are some sort of, I don't know whether to call them early adopters or really thought leaders might be a better term, clients who are, I think, already thinking in this vein without using the term APDS. So they're thinking about, how do we standardize data and data models so that I, as a company or an enterprise, can leverage all the data that we're talking about here in an easy way, and in a standardized data model. And so these, in my experience, tend to be the largest organizations, the ones who are most IT savvy. So large technology platform providers like Google, Microsoft, and so forth. Particularly large, very sort of forward-thinking cities or transit organizations. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on reaching out to people like that to help drive demand for this from the end customer, which is always probably the most powerful way to do it.
Yeah, and so that's what we've been doing really through all of our ISO work. I mean, that's where we've been engaged with the Hondas, the GMs, the Toyotas. We've got a lot going on in there. We've been doing a lot with ITS organizations as well, so tolling roads and other large ITS entities. Again, as an example, the European Union is in the process of updating their DATEX 2 data standard, which is a very comprehensive data standard around intelligent transportation systems. They are in the process of adopting some of this technology or some of these data specifications into that. So the answer is we are reaching out to as many entities as we can, but that are ready to engage. There are some entities that aren't ready to engage yet or are waiting to see what happens. But to that point, and let me kind of get to the next slide here. So, and we kind of talked about this. This is industry led. And the key here is we set the priorities. And it's up to you to tell us where do you drive the value from the specification. So Peter, to your question, if you were to say we have a lot of work going on with Google Maps and you would like to engage them and you need APDS's support engaging them, let us know. We're here. We would love to help you do that. If there is another need where any entity needs help internally with understanding what the data specification is, we are here. We are glad to help with internal sessions and webinars to help educate your folks. As you can see, we've engaged a lot of different entities outside of the industry that are leveraging these tools. And frankly, we need help because there's more people asking for us. So any of the people on this call, if you would like to participate more, we could use your help in understanding the APDS specification and then communicating and engaging with other entities. And so the key is we need your participation to help us know where to go, as well as to help us to further the goal of making it easier to share data within and outside of the industry. So very quickly, what's on the horizon? As I said, the new messaging formats and guidelines will be published next month. We're just going through the final document cleanups. APDS release 3.0 is available for comment in April. The ISO, we are in the process of going through the approvals and getting every national standards body. You have to go to each country and get them to approve it. That's in process right now. We expect the final one to happen in summer of 2021, at which point it'll be published as an ISO document for people to use. The European DATEX reference data standard is adopting APDS as its parking data elements. And for those in Europe, it's part 6 of the SEND DATEX 2 standard. The significance of that is a lot of EU regulations depend on or refer to DATEX 2. And then we also have a lot of continued collaboration with other ISO working groups. So we've talked about the automated valet parking systems. We've talked about sidewalk and curb operations, and we're doing a lot with the ITS community as well on how to encode traffic rules. In North America, I would say all of this stuff still applies, but we're much more fragmented in how some of this stuff is done. Every state and every city has its own traffic rules. In Europe, they tend to be much more standardized. So that's why we're forming this group now. We are looking for this group to provide their perspective on critical needs and to engage with each other on what are the right priorities. And to that end, here are the resources or the user groups that we've already talked about. But here are the next steps and resources. So you can request 2.1 online right now. Requesting 3.0 will be available in about a couple weeks. And we're looking for people to get involved. And if you have a need or would like more training or a more in-depth review of the standard, please reach out to Rachel or myself and we can get that organized to help your team or organization understand it in more detail. We understand that it requires education before we can start taking some of those steps towards understanding. So with that, Peter, I hope I answered some of your question. Are there any other questions? I know we're over time right now. Great. Thank you very much for your involvement. Please reach out again to Rachel or myself or contact the website, allianceforparkingdatastandards.org to get more information. We look forward for your continued participation and questions and helping us guide where this goes. So thank you very much for your time.